In this sad hour of the world's history, when so many homes have been broken up, and so many hearts burdened with heavy sorrows, it is comforting to think of the many heroic souls who, throughout the struggle, have gone about their daily tasks with unfailing courage and cheerfulness, and by doing so have helped to carry the burdens of the world, and to sustain other hearts as heavy as their own. It is comforting also to know that there are many instances of happy reunions after long and unspeakable anxieties, adventures, and trials. This story of two little Belgian refugees is based upon the actual experience of two Belgian children, and the incident of the locket is quite true. The characters of the eel woman and the mother of the twins have also their living originals, from whose courage and devotion the author has received much inspiration. End of preface.
It was late in the afternoon of a long summer's day in Belgium. Father Van Hove was still at work in the harvest field, though the sun hung so low in the west that his shadow, stretching far across the level green plain, reached almost to the little red-roofed house on the edge of the village which was its home. Another shadow, not so long, and quite a little broader, stretched itself beside his, for Mother Van Hove was also in the field, helping her husband to load the green sheaves upon an old blue farm cart which stood near by. There was also two short, fat shadows which bobbed briskly about over the green meadow as their owners danced among the wheat sheaves, or carried handfuls of fresh grass to Pierre, the patient white farm horse hitched to the cart. These gay shadows belonged to Jan and Marie, sometimes called by their parents by Janke and Me for short. Jan and Marie were the twin son and daughter of Father and Mother Van Hove, and though they were but 8 years old, they were already quite used to helping their father and mother with the work of their little farm. They knew how to feed the chickens and hunt the eggs and lead Pierre to water and pull weeds in the garden. In the spring they had even helped sow the wheat and barley, and now in the late summer they were helping to harvest the grain. The children had been in the field since sunrise, but not all of the long bright day had been given to labor. Early in the morning their father's pitchfork had uncovered a nest of field mice, and the twins had made another nest, as much like the first as possible, to put the homeless field babies in, hoping that their mother would find them again and resume her interrupted housekeeping. Then they had played for a long time in a tiny canal which separated the wheat field from the meadow where Belle, their black and white cow, was pastured. There was also Fidel, the dog, their faithful companion and friend. The children had followed him on many excursions among the willows along the river bank, for Fidel might at any moment come upon the rabbit or water rat that he was always seeking, and what a pity it would be for Jan and Marie to miss a sight like that. When the sun was high overhead, the whole family, Fidel also, had rested under a tree by the little river, and Jan and Marie had shared with their father and mother the bread and cheese which had been brought from home for their noon meal. Then they had taken a nap in the shade, for it is a long day that begins and ends with the midsummer sun. The bees hummed so drowsily in the clover that Mother Van Hove also took 40 winks, while Father Van Hove led Pierre to the river for a drink and tied him where he could enjoy the rich meadow grass for a while. And now the long day was nearly over. The last level rays of the disappearing sun glistened on the red roofs of the village, and the windows of the little houses gave back an answering flash of light. On the steeple of the tiny church the gilded cross shone like fire against the gray of the eastern sky. The village clock struck 7, and was answered faintly by the sound of the distant chimes from the Cathedral of Malines, miles away across the plain. For some time Father Van Hove had been standing on top of the load, catching the sheaves which Mother Van Hove tossed up to him, and stowing them away in the farm wagon, which was already heaped high with the golden grain. As the clock struck, he paused in his labor, took off his hat, and wiped his brow. He listened for a moment to the music of the bells, glanced at the western sky, already rosy with promise of the sunset, and at the weathercock above the cross on the church steeple. Then he looked down at the sheaves of wheat, still standing like tiny tents across the field. "It's no use, Mother," he said at last. "We cannot pull it all in tonight. But the sky gives promise to a fair day tomorrow, and the weathercock also points east. We can finish in one more load. Let us go home now." "The clock struck 7," said Jan. "I counted the strokes." "What a scholar is our Janka!" laughed his mother, as she lifted the last sheaf of wheat on her fork and tossed it at Father Van Hove's feet. "He can count to 7 when it is supper time. As for me, I do not need a clock. I can tell the time of day by the ache of my bones, and besides that, there is Belle in the pasture bars waiting to be milked and bellowing to call me." "I don't need a clock either," chimed in Marie, patting her apron tenderly. "I can tell time by my stomach. It is 100 years since we ate our lunch. I know it is." "Come then, my starvelings," said Mother Van Hove, pinching Marie's fat cheek, "and you shall save your strength by riding home on the load. Come, Mommy, up you go." She swung Marie into the air as she spoke. Father Van Hove, reaching down from his perch on top of the load, caught her in his arms and enthroned her upon the fragrant grain. "And now it is your turn, my Janka," cried Mother Van Hove, "and you shall ride on the back of old Pierre like a soldier going to the wars." She lifted Jan to the horse's back, while Father Van Hove climbed down to earth once more and took up the reins. Fidel came back dripping wet from the river, shook himself, and fell in behind the wagon. "You, you!" cried Father Van Hove to old Pierre, and the little procession moved slowly up the cart path toward the shining windows of the red-roofed house. The home of the Van Hoves lay on the very outskirts of the little hamlet of Meer. Beside it ran a yellow ribbon of road, which stretched across the green plain near the city of Malines. As they turned from the cart path into the road, the old blue cart became part of a little procession of similar wagons, for the other men of Meer were also late in coming home to the village from their outlying farms. "Good evening, neighbor," cried Father Van Hove to Father Maes, whose home lay beyond his in the village. "How are your crops coming in?" "Never better," answered Father Maes. "I have more wheat to the acre than ever before." "So have I, thanks be to the good God," answered Father Van Hove. "The winter will find our barns full this year." "Yes," replied Father Maes a little sadly. "That is, if we have no bad luck. But Jules van der House was in the city yesterday and heard rumors of a German army on our borders. It is very likely only an idle tale to frighten the women and children, but Jules says there are men also who believe it." "I shall believe nothing of the sort," said Father Van Hove stoutly. "Are we not safe under the protection of our treaty?" "No, no, neighbor. There is nothing to fear. Belgium is neutral ground." "I hope you may be right," answered Father Maes, cracking his whip, and the cart moved on. Mother Van Hove, meanwhile, had hastened ahead of the cart to stir up the kitchen fire and put the kettle on before the others should reach home. And when Father Van Hove at last drove into the farmyard, she was already on the way to the pasture barns with her milk pail on her arm. "Set the table for supper, Mummy," she called back, "and do not let the pot boil over. Jan, you may shut up the fowls; they have already gone to roost." "And what shall I do, Mother?" laughed Father Van Hove. "You," she called back, "you may unharness Pierre and turn him out to the pasture for the night, and I'll wager I shall be back with a full milk pail before you've even so much as fed the pig, let alone the other chores. Men are so slow." She waved her hand gaily and disappeared behind the pasture bars as she spoke. "Hurry now, my man," said Father Van Hove to Jan. "We must not let Mother beat us. We will let the cart stand right there near the barn, and tomorrow we can store the grain away to make room for a new load. I will let you lead Pierre to the pasture while I feed the pig myself. By her squeals she is hungry enough to eat you up in one mouthful." End of chapter 1. Recording by Lynette Geisel. The Belgian Twins by Lucy Fitch Perkins. Chapter 2. The Rumors. When Mother Van Hove returned from the pasture 15 minutes later, her orders had all been carried out. Pierre was in the pasture, the hens were shut up for the night, and the pig, which had been squealing with hunger, was row grunting with satisfaction over her evening meal. Fidel was gnawing a bone, and Father Van Hove was already washing his hands at the pump beside the kitchen door. "You are all good children," said the mother as she set down her brimming pail and took her turn at the wash basin and the soap. "Jan and Marie, have you washed your hands?" "I have," called Marie from the kitchen, "and supper is ready and the table set." "I washed my hands in the canal this morning," pleaded Jan. "Won't that do?" "You ate your lunch this noon, too," answered his mother promptly. "Won't that do?" "Why do you need to eat again, when you have already eaten twice today?" "Because I am hungry again," answered Jan. "Well, you are also dirty again," said his mother as she put the soap in his hands and wiped her own on the clean towel which Marie handed her from the door. She cleaned her wooden shoes in the bundle of straw which lay for the purpose beside the kitchen door. Then she went inside and took her place opposite Father Van Hove at the little round oaken table by the window. Marie was already in her chair, and in a moment Jan joined them with a beaming smile and a face which, though clean in the middle, showed a gray border from ear to ear. "If you don't believe I'm clean, look at the towel," he said, holding it up. "Oh, my heart!" cried his mother, throwing up her hands. "I declare there's but one creature in all God's world that cares nothing for cleanliness. Even a pig has some manners if given half a chance, but boys!" She seized the grimy towel and held it up despairingly for Father Van Hove to see. "He's just wet his face and wiped all the dirt off on the towel. The devil himself is not more afraid of holy water than Jan Van Hove is to water of any kind," she cried. "Go and wash yourself properly, Janke," said his father sternly, and Jan disappeared through the kitchen door. Sounds of vigorous pumping and splashing about were heard in the kitchen, and when Jan appeared once more, he was allowed to take his place at the supper table with the family. Father Van Hove bowed his head, and the twins and their mother made the sign of the cross with him, as they began their grace before meat. "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen," prayed Father Van Hove. "Hail Mary, full of grace." Then, as the prayer continued, the mother and children, with folded hands and bowed heads, joined in the petition. "Holy Mother, Mary of God, pray for us sinners now and in the hour of our death. Amen." A clatter of spoons followed the grace, and Mother Van Hove's good buttermilk pap was not long in disappearing down their 4 hungry throats. The long day in the open air had made the children so sleepy that they scarcely kept their eyes open through the meal. "Come, my children," said their mother briskly as she rose from the table. "Pop into bed, both of you, as fast as you can go. You are already half asleep. Father, you help them with their buttons and hear them say their prayers while I wash up these dishes and take care of the milk." She took a candle from the chimney piece as she spoke and started down the cellar with the skimmer. When she came back into the kitchen once more, the children were safely tucked in bed, and her husband was seated by the kitchen door with his chair tipped back against the wall, smoking his evening pipe. Mother Van Hove cleared the table, washed the dishes, and brushed the crumbs from the tiled floor. Then she spread the white sand once more under the table and in a wide border around the edge of the room, and hung the brush outside the kitchen door. Father Van Hove smoked in silence as she moved about the room. At last he said to her, "Lonnie, did you hear what our neighbor Moss said tonight as we were talking on the road?" "No," said his wife. "I was hurrying home to get supper." "Moss says there are rumors of a German army on our frontier," said Father Van Hove. His wife paused in front of him, with her hands on her hips. "Who brought that story to town?" she demanded. "Jules Verhulst," answered her husband. "Jules Verhulst!" sniffed Mother Van Hove with disdain. "He knows more things that aren't so than any man in this village. I wouldn't believe anything on his say so. Besides, the whole world knows that all the powers have agreed that Belgium shall be neutral ground, and have bound themselves solemnly to protect that neutrality. I learned that in school, and so did you." "Yes," sighed Father Van Hove, "I learned it too, and surely no nation can have anything against us. We have given no one cause for complaint that I know of." "It's nonsense," said his wife with decision. "Belgium is safe enough as far as that goes, but one certainly has to work hard here just to make ends meet and get food for all the hungry mouths. They say it is different in America. There you work less and get more, and are further away from meddlesome neighboring countries besides. I sometimes wish we had gone there with my sister. She and her husband started with no more than we have, and now they are rich. At least they were when I last heard from them, but that was a long time ago," she finished. "Well," said Father Van Hove as he stood up and knocked the ashes from his pipe, "it may be that they have more money and less work, but I've lived here in this spot ever since I was born, and my father before me. Somehow I feel I could never take root in any other soil. I'm content with things as they are." "So am I, for the matter of that," said Mother Van Hove cheerfully, as she put Fidel outside and shut the door for the night. Then taking the candle from the chimney piece once more, she led the way to the inner room where the twins were already soundly sleeping. End of chapter 2. Recording by Lynette Geisel.
Mere slept quietly in the moonlight. There was not a sound to break the stillness, except once, when Mother Van Hove's old rooster caught a glimpse of the waning moon through the window of the chicken house and crowed lustily, thinking it was the sun. The other roosters of the village, wiser than he, made no response to his call, and in a moment he too returned to his interrupted slumbers. But though there was as yet no sound to tell of their approach, the moon looked down upon 3 horsemen galloping over the yellow ribbon of road from Malines toward the little village. Soon the sound of the horses' hoofs beating upon the hardened earth throbbed through the village itself, and Fidel sat up on the kitchen doorstep, pricked up his ears, and listened. He heard the hoof-beats and awakened the echoes with a sharp bark. Mother Van Hove sat up in bed and listened. Another dog barked, and another, and now she too heard the hoof-beats. Nearer they came, and nearer, and now she could hear a voice shouting. She shook her husband. "Wake up!" she whispered in his ear. "Something is wrong. Fidel barks, and I hear strange noises about. Wake up!" "Fidel is crazy," said Father Van Hove sleepily. "He thinks some weasel is after the chickens, very likely. Fidel will attend to it. Go to sleep." He sank back again upon his pillows, but his wife seized his arm and pulled him up. "Listen," she said. "Oh, listen! Weasels do not ride on horseback. There are hoof-beats on the road." "Some neighbor returning late from Malines," said Father Van Hove, yawning. "It does not concern us." But his wife was already out of bed and at the window. The horsemen were now plainly visible, riding like the wind, and as they whirred by the houses their shout thrilled through the quiet streets of the village. "Burghers, awake, awake, awake!" Wide awake at last, Father Van Hove sprang out of bed and hastily began putting down his clothes. His wife was already nearly dressed and had lighted a candle. Other lights sparkled from the windows of other houses. Suddenly the bell in the church steeple began to ring wildly, as though it, too, were shaken with a sudden terror. "It must be a fire," said Father Van Hove. Still fastening her clothing, his wife ran out of the door and looked about in every direction. "I see no fire," she said, "but the village street is full of people running to the square. Hurry, hurry! We must take the children with us. They must not be left here alone." She ran to wake the children as she spoke, and, helped by her trembling fingers, they too were soon dressed, and the 4 ran together up the road toward the village church. The bell still clanged madly from the steeple, and the vibrations seemed to shake the very flesh of the trembling children as they clung to their mother's hands and tried to keep up with their father's rapid strides. They found all the village gathered in front of the little town hall. On its steps stood the Burgermeister and the village priest, and near them, still sitting astride his foam-flecked steed, was one of the soldiers who had brought the alarm. His 2 companions were already far beyond Meer, flying over the road to arouse the villages which lay farther to the east. The church bell suddenly ceased its metallic clatter, and while its deep tones still throbbed through the night air, the wondering and frightened people crowded about the steps in breathless suspense. The Burgermeister raised his hand. Even in the moonlight it could be seen that he was pale. He spoke quickly. "Neighbors," he said, "there is bad news. The German army is on our borders. It is necessary for every man of military age and training to join the colors at once in case the army is needed for defense. There is not a moment to lose. This messenger is from headquarters. He will tell you what you are to do." The soldier now spoke for the first time. "Men of Belgium," he cried, "your services are needed for your country and your king. The men of Meer are to report at once to the army headquarters at Malines. Do not stop even to change your clothing. We are not yet at war, and our good King Albert still hopes to avert it by an armed peace, but the neutrality of Belgium is at stake. We must be ready to protect it at any cost, and at an instant's notice. Go at once to the Brussels gate of Malines. An officer will meet you there and tell you what to do. I must ride on to carry the alarm to Bitta." He wheeled his horse as he spoke, and, turning in his saddle, lifted his sword and cried, "Vive le roi! Vive le roi! Vive la Belgique!" Came in an answering shout from the people of Meer, and he was gone. There was a moment of stunned silence as he rode away, then a sound of women weeping. The Burgomaster came down from the steps of the town hall, said farewell to his wife and children, and took his place at the head of the little group of men which was already beginning to form in marching order. The priest moved about among his people with words of comfort. Father Van Hove turned to his wife and said to Jan and Marie, who were clinging to her skirts, "It is only a bad dream, my little ones," he said, patting their heads tenderly. "We shall wake up some day, and you, my wife, do not despair. I shall soon return, no doubt. Our good king will yet save us from war. You must finish the harvest alone, but—" "Fall in!" cried the voice of the Burgomaster, and Father Van Hove kissed his wife and children and stepped forward. Mother Van Hove bravely checked her rising sobs. "We shall go with you to Malines at any rate," she said firmly. And as the little group of men started forward along the yellow road, she and many more women and children of the village marched away with them in the gray twilight which precedes the coming of the dawn. The priest went with his people, praying for them as he walked, in a voice that shook with feeling. The sky was red in the east, and the larks were already singing over the quiet fields when the men of Meer, followed by their wives and children, presented themselves at the Brussels gate of the city. End of chapter 3. By Lucy Fitch Perkins. Chapter 4. For King, for Law and Liberty. At the gate they were met by an officer who at once took command of the company. There was only a moment for hasty good-byes before the order to march was given, and the women and children watched the little column stride bravely away up the street toward the armory, where the uniforms and arms were kept. They followed at a little distance, and took up their station across the street from the great doors, through which the men had disappeared. There was little talking among them. Only the voice of the priest could be heard now and then as he said a few words to one and another of the waiting women. It was still so early in the morning that the streets of the city were not yet filled with people going to work. Only those, like themselves, concerned with the sad business of war, were abroad. To Jan and Marie the long wait seemed endless, but at last the doors of the armory sprang open. There was a burst of martial music, and a band playing the national hymn appeared. "For King, for Law and Liberty," thrilled the bugles, and amid the waving of flags and the cheers of the people, who had now begun to fill the streets, a regiment of soldiers marched away toward the north. Jan and Marie stood with their mother on the edge of the sidewalk, eagerly scanning every face as the soldiers passed, and at last Jan shouted, "I see father! I see father!" Mother Van Hove lifted her two children high in her arms for him to see, but Father Van Hove could only smile a brave good-bye as he marched swiftly past. "No tears, my children," cried the priest. "Let them see no tears. Send them away with a smile." And, standing on the edge of the sidewalk, he made the sign of the cross and raised his hand in blessing as the troops went by. For a time Mother Van Hove and the children ran along the sidewalk, trying to keep pace with the soldiers, but their quick strides were too much for the twins, and it was not long before Marie said breathlessly, "My legs are too short. I can't run so fast." "I can't, too," gasped Jan. Mother Van Hove stopped short at once, and the three stood still, hand in hand, and watched the soldiers until they turned a corner and disappeared from sight through the Antwerp gate of the city. They were quite alone, for the other women and children had gone no farther than the armory, and were already on their homeward way to Meer. Now for the first time Mother Van Hove gave way to grief, and Jan and Marie wept with her, but it was only for a moment. Then she wiped her eyes, and the twins too, on her apron, and said firmly, "Come, my lambs, tears will not bring him back. We must go home now as fast as we can. There is need there for all that we can do. You must be the man of the house now, my Janke, and help me take your father's place on the farm. And Marie must be our little house mother. We must be as brave as soldiers, even though we cannot fight." "I think I could be braver if I had some breakfast," sobbed Janke. Mother Van Hove struck her hands together in dismay. "I never once thought of food," she cried, "and I haven't a red cent with me. We cannot buy a breakfast. We must just go hungry until we get home. But soldiers must often go hungry, my little ones. We must be as brave as they. Come now, I will be the captain. Forward, march!" Jan and Marie stiffened their little backs as she gave the word of command, and shoulder to shoulder they marched down the street toward the city gate to the martial refrain, "Le roi, la loi, la liberté," which Mother Van Hove hummed for them under her breath. It was a long way back to the little farmhouse, and when at last the three weary pilgrims reached it, they were met by an indignant chorus of protests from all the creatures which had been left behind. Belle was lowing at the pasture bars, the pig was squealing angrily in her pen, the rooster had crowed himself hoarse, and Fidel, patient Fidel, was sitting on guard at the back door. Mother Van Hove flew into the kitchen the moment she reached the house, and in 2 minutes Jan and Marie were seated before a breakfast of bread and milk. Then she fed the pig, let out the hens, and gave Fidel a bone which she had saved for him from the soup. Last of all she milked the cow, and when this was done and she had a cup of coffee herself, the clock in the steeple struck 12. Even Mother Van Hove's strength was not equal to work in the harvest field that day, but she stowed the load of wheat which had been brought home the night before in the barn, and after the chores were done at night, she and the twins went straight to bed and slept as only the very weary can, until the sun streamed into their windows in the morning. End of chapter 4. Belgian Twins by Lucy Fitch Perkins. Chapter 5. Doing a Man's Work. When Jan and Marie awoke, their mother's bed was empty. "She's gone to milk the cow," cried Marie. "Come, Jan, we will surprise her. When she comes back from the pasture, we will have breakfast all ready." "You can," said Jan, as he struggled into his clothes and twisted himself nearly in two trying to do up the buttons in the back. "You can, but I must do a man's work. I will go out and feed the pig, and catch old Pierre and hitch him to the cart," he said importantly. "I must finish the wheat harvest to-day." "Oh," said Marie, "you will spill the pig feed all over yourself. You are such a messy boy." "I guess I can do it just as well as you can make coffee," said Jan with spirit. "You've never made coffee in your life." "I've watched Mother do it lots of times," said Marie. "I'm sure I can do it just the same way." "All right, let's see you do it then," said Jan, and he strode out of the room with his hands in his pockets, taking as long steps as his short legs would permit. When she was dressed and washed, Marie ran to the pump and filled the kettle. Then she stirred the embers of the fire in the kitchen and put on fresh coal. She set the kettle on to boil, and only slopped a little water on her apron in doing so. Then she put the dishes on the table. Meanwhile, she heard no sound from Jan. She went to the kitchen door and looked out. Jan had already let out the fowls, and was just in the act of feeding the pig. He had climbed up on the fence around the pig pen, and by dint of great effort had succeeded in lifting the heavy pail of feed to the top of it. He was now trying to let it down on the other side and pour the contents into the trough, but the pig was greedy, and the moment the pail came within reach, she stuck her nose and her forefeet into it. This added weight was too much for poor Jan. Down went the pail with a crash into the trough, and Jan himself tumbled suddenly forward. His feet flew out behind him, and he was left hanging head down like a jackknife over the fence. It was just at this moment that Marie came to the door, and when she saw Jan balancing on the fence and kicking out wildly with his feet, she screamed with laughter. Jan was screaming too, but with pain and indignation. "Come here and pick me off this fence," he roared. "It's cutting me in two. Oh, mother, mother!" Marie ran to the pig pen as fast as she could. She snatched an old box by the stable as she ran, and placing it against the fence, seized one of Jan's feet, which were still waving wildly in the air, and planted it firmly on the box. "Oh, oh!" laughed Marie, as Jan reached the ground once more. "If you could only have seen yourself, Jan, you would have laughed too. Instead of pouring the pig feed onto yourself, you poured yourself onto the pig feed." "I don't see anything to laugh at," said Jan with dignity. "It might have happened to any man." "Anyway, you'll have to get the pail again," said Marie, wiping her eyes. "That greedy pig will bang it all to pieces if you leave it in the pen." "I can't reach it," said Jan. "Yes, you can," said Marie. "I'll hold your legs so you won't fall in, and you can fish for it with a stick." She ran for a stick to poke with, while Jan bravely mounted the box again, and, firmly anchored by Marie's grasp upon his legs, he soon succeeded in rescuing the pail. "Anyway, I guess I fed the pig just as well as you have made the coffee," he said, as he handed it over to Marie. "Oh, my sakes!" cried Marie. "I forgot all about the coffee!" And she ran back to the kitchen to find that the kettle had boiled over and put the fire out. Jan stuck his head in the door just as she got the bellows to start the fire again. "What did I tell you?" he shouted, running out his tongue derisively. "Scat!" said Marie, shaking the bellows at him, and Jan sauntered away toward the pasture with Pierre's halter over his arm. Pierre had been eating grass for 2 nights and a day without doing any work, and it took Jan some time to catch him and put the halter over his head. When at last he returned from the pasture, red and tired, but triumphant, leading Pierre, Marie and her mother had already finished their breakfast. "Look what a man we have!" cried Mother Van Hove as Jan appeared. "He has caught Pierre all by himself." "He lifted me clear off my feet when I put his halter on," said Jan proudly, "but I hung on, and he had to come." "Marie," cried her mother, "our Jan has earned a good breakfast. Cook an egg for him while I hitch Pierre to the cart. Then, while he and I work in the field, you can put the house in order. There is only one more load to bring in, and we can do that by ourselves." By noon the last of the wheat had been garnered, and this time Jan drove Pierre home, while his mother sat on the load. In the afternoon the three unloaded the wagon and stowed the grain away in the barn to be threshed. And when the long day's work was over, and they had eaten their simple supper of bread and milk, Mother Van Hove and the children went together down the village street to see their neighbors and hear the news, if there should be any. There were no daily papers in Meer, and now there were no young men to go to the city and bring back the gossip of the day, as there had used to be. The women, with their babies on their arms, stood about in the street, talking quietly and sadly among themselves. On the doorsteps a few old men lingered together over their pipes. Already the bigger boys were playing soldier with paper caps on their heads and sticks for guns. The smaller children were shouting and chasing each other through the little street of the village. Jan and Marie joined in a game of blind man's buff, while Mother Van Hove stopped with the group of women. "If we only knew what to expect," sighed the Burgomeister's wife, as she shifted her baby from one arm to the other. "It seems as if we should know better what to do. In a day or two I shall send my big boy Leon to the city for a paper. It's hard to wait quietly and know nothing." "Our good king and queen doubtless know everything," said the wife of Burmese. "They will do better for us than we could do for ourselves, even if we knew all that they do." "And there are our brave men besides," added Mother Van Hove. "We must not forget them. We are not yet at war. I pray God we may not be, and that we shall soon see them come marching home again to tell us that the trouble, whatever it is over, and that we may go on living in peace as we did before." "It seems like a year since yesterday," said the Burgomeister's wife. "Work makes the time pass quickly," said Mother Van Hove cheerfully. "Jan and I got in the last of our wheat today. He helped me like a man." "Who will thresh it for you?" asked the wife of Burmese. "I will thresh it myself if need be," said Mother Van Hove with spirit. "My good man shall not come home and find the farm work behind, if I can help it." And with these brave words she said good night to the other women, called Jan and Marie, and turned once more down the street toward the little house on the edge of the village. Far across the peaceful twilight fields came the sound of distant bells. "Hark!" said Mother Van Hove to the twins, "the cathedral bells of Malines, and they are playing the Line of Flanders." "The Line of Flanders," sang the bells, and, standing upon the threshold of her little home, with head held proudly erect, Mother Van Hove lifted her voice and joined the words to the melody. "They will never conquer him, the old Line of Flanders, so long as he has claws," she sang. And the twins, looking up into her brave and inspired face, sang too. End of chapter 5.